I've been a cave rescue technician with the county for 11 years. Before that, I did confined space entry for a municipal water authority. Storm drains, cisterns, the kind of concrete throats that go down 40 feet and smell like pennies and old rain. I hold certifications in vertical rescue, rope access, and hazmat awareness. I've been on over 200 callouts. I've pulled living people out of places that looked like coffins, and I've recovered bodies from places that were. I'm telling you this not because I think credentials make a person brave, but because I need you to understand that when I describe what happened at Harker Sink, I am not guessing. I am not embellishing. I know what ropes do under load. I know what stone sounds like when it shifts. I know the difference between a draft and a breath. And I know with a certainty that has cost me sleep for 14 months, that what pulled that rope was not wind, not water, not rockfall, and not any human being on our roster. Harker Sink is a karst feature about 90 minutes east of town on state forest land that technically falls under 3 overlapping jurisdictions: the Forestry Service, the County Parks Department, and a private conservancy that holds a scenic easement on the ridgeline. The cave itself is not spectacular. The entrance is a slumped sinkhole, maybe 12 feet across, choked with leaf litter and runoff debris, and it drops into a modest horizontal system. A few hundred meters of walking passage, some crawlways, and then a series of short vertical pitches that descend into a lower level nobody has fully surveyed. The lower level floods in spring. There's a seasonal sump that seals the back end. It's the kind of cave that regional grottos put on their C list. Worth a trip if you're already in the area, not worth a drive. The state installed a gate on it in 2019 after a pair of college students got turned around in the crawlway section and had to be walked out by rangers. Standard bat-friendly gate, combination lock, sign-in sheet in a weatherproof box bolted to the rock. The sign-in sheet is important. I'll come back to it. The first call-out was October 7th, a Tuesday. Parks maintenance had gone up to check the gate after a heavy rain cycle and found that the static rope on the first pitch, a 30-meter length of 10.5-millimeter line that we'd installed as a permanent handline the previous spring, was taut. Not just snug, taut. The rope had been rigged as a simple traverse line with a redirect off a natural thread about halfway along the pitch lip, and the bottom end was tied off to a pair of anchor bolts we drilled into a flowstone shelf. It should have had a gentle curve to it, a natural drape. Instead, it was humming. The maintenance tech, a woman named Dana Kessler, whom I've worked with for years, said she could feel it vibrating through her glove when she touched it. She assumed a rock had shifted and pinned the line somewhere below, maybe in the squeeze where the pitch dog legs, and she radioed it in as a routine gear damage report. Incident ticket KS-2024-1471. I know the number because I've looked at it more times than I can count. I drove up the next morning to assess. It was one of those October days where the light is golden, but the air has a bite, and the forest smelled like wet bark and decomposition. I signed in on the sheet. My name, the date, time in at 0847. Purpose of visit, rope inspection. I noticed the last entry before mine was Dana's from the previous day, and before that, nothing for 6 weeks. The cave was not popular. I geared up, clipped into my cow's tail, and leaned over the lip. The rope was slack. I want to be precise about this. The line that Dana described as rigid, vibrating, and warm to the touch. She'd specifically mentioned warmth, which you'd expect from friction, was now hanging in a normal catenary. I descended the pitch on my descender, checked every meter of the rope for glazing, sheath damage, or core exposure. Nothing. The anchor bolts at the bottom were solid. The natural thread was intact. The figure-8 follow-through at the top was dressed and snug. There was no rockfall debris on the line, no pinch point, no evidence of any load having been applied. I checked the dogleg squeeze. Dry, clear. I even went to the top of the second pitch and looked down with my helmet lamp. Just darkness and the faint sound of water moving somewhere far below. That distant trickling that caves produce, the kind of sound that could be 10 meters away or 100 because the stone plays tricks with acoustics. Everything was normal. I wrote it up as probable thermal contraction/expansion of rope due to temperature differential between surface and cave environment. I noted that static kern mantle can develop apparent tension when one end is anchored in a cold zone and the other is exposed to direct sunlight, especially after rain when evaporative cooling is a factor. I noted that the warmth Dana felt could have been her own body heat reflecting off the taut sheath. These were plausible explanations. I believed them. I filed the report, closed the ticket, and drove home. The second call-out was October 19th. Same cave, same rope. This time the report came from a surveyor with the Conservancy who'd gone up to photograph the sinkhole for a drainage study. He hadn't entered the cave. He said he was standing at the lip of the sink, maybe 4 meters from the gate, when he heard what he described as a sound like a guitar string being plucked, but low, like a bass note. He said it repeated 3 times at roughly even intervals. He didn't touch the rope. He didn't go near the gate. He called the Forestry Service, who called Parks, who called us. New ticket KS-2024-1523. I went up with a partner this time, a fellow tech named Marcus. We arrived around 14:30, signed in, my name, Marcus's name, time, purpose. I noticed the sign-in sheet had no entries between my last visit and today. The surveyor hadn't signed in because he hadn't gone past the gate. Fine. We unlocked the gate and went in. Slack rope, normal drape, no damage, no load evidence. But Marcus noticed something I'd missed on my first visit, or that hadn't been there. At the bottom of the first pitch, where the line was tied to the anchor bolts, there was a small pile of calcium dust on the flowstone shelf. Not much. A tablespoon, maybe. The kind of powder you'd get from a bolt grinding against its hole under cyclic stress. The way a signpost wobbles in a storm, and you find a little cone of concrete powder at its base the next morning. The bolts were 12-millimeter stainless expansion anchors rated for 25 kilonewtons each. I tested them with a torque wrench. They were still seated, but the dust was there. Marcus and I looked at each other in the light of our helmet lamps, and I could see him running the same math I was. To produce visible wear dust on a stainless bolt seated in limestone, you'd need cyclic loading. Repeated force applied and released, at a magnitude of at least several kilonewtons. That's hundreds of kilograms of force. Rhythmic, sustained long enough to abrade steel against calcium carbonate and leave a visible residue. This wasn't temperature differential. This wasn't a breeze plucking the rope. Something had been pulling this line with real serious physical force and doing it repeatedly. We descended to the second pitch. We checked the third. We went as far as the head of the lower level, where the passage narrowed to a slot about 60 centimeters wide, and the air changed. I remember stopping there because the smell hit me. Not the normal cave smell of wet rock and old air, but something metallic and close, like the inside of a shipping container or the stairwell of a parking garage. Cold, damp, oppressive. That basement feeling, that feeling you get when you're descending a concrete stairwell and you become aware of how many floors of building are above you and how the echoes of your footsteps are the only proof anyone is alive down here. Marcus felt it too. He said, "The air's wrong," and I agreed, and we backed out. I wrote the report honestly this time. I noted the dust. I noted the metallic odor. I recommended a monitoring protocol. A simple tension logger zip-tied to the rope, the kind we use for bridge inspections, with a data card that records load in kilonewtons over time. I also recommended that the lower level be formally closed pending a joint assessment. I submitted the report with a request for a multi-agency coordination meeting, which, under the interagency agreement, required sign-off from the Forestry District Supervisor, the County Parks Director, and the Conservancy's land manager. The Forestry Supervisor was on leave. The Parks Director wanted to wait until the quarterly safety review, which was 3 weeks out. The Conservancy's land manager didn't return calls for 5 days because she was at a conference in Denver. Ticket KS-2024-1523 sat in pending review status for 11 days. During those 11 days, I drove past the Harker Sink access road twice on my way to other calls. Both times, late at night, I slowed on the highway and looked up the ridgeline. There's a long stretch of State Route 9 where the road runs straight for maybe 5 miles between two ridges, and at night there's nothing. No houses, no intersections, just sodium lights turning the fog into a dirty amber ceiling, and your headlights catching the reflectors on the guard rails. The forest is a black wall on both sides. I remember the second time, around midnight, I pulled over and turned off my engine and just sat there. I don't know what I was listening for. The ticking of my cooling engine, wind in the trees, nothing from the ridge, nothing from the cave, which was 4 miles uphill through dense second-growth timber. But I felt observed, not watched. Observed. The way you feel when you realize a camera has been on you the whole time and you've been behaving as if you were alone. I started the truck and left. The tension logger was approved on October 30th. I installed it on the 31st alone because Marcus had a family commitment and no other techs were available. I signed in. I noted that the sign-in sheet had not been touched since my last visit with Marcus. I installed the logger at the midpoint of the rope, where the redirect was, using a Prusik loop and a locking carabiner. I verified the data card was recording. Baseline reading, 0.03 kilonewtons, essentially nothing. The weight of the rope below the redirect. I checked the anchor bolts. New dust, more of it, maybe 2 tablespoons. I photographed it. I bagged a sample, which later came back from the lab as calcium carbonate with traces of calcium fluoride ID and stainless steel particulate, consistent with limestone abrasion against 316 grade hardware. Exactly what you'd expect if something had been pulling the bolt sideways in its hole with enough force to grind metal against rock. In the report, I used the phrase significant unexplained cyclic loading consistent with a dynamic force source. I didn't speculate on what the source was because I didn't know. I don't use words I can't defend. I collected the data card 2 weeks later, November 14th. Marcus came with me. We downloaded the log in the parking area before we even went in, using a laptop on the tailgate of my truck. The file was 212 megabytes of time-stamped load data recorded at 1-second intervals over 14 days. Most of it was flat, 0.03, 0.03, 0.03 background noise, but there were 6 discrete events. The first was on November 2nd at 0313. The load spiked from baseline to 4.1 kilonewtons over a period of 11 seconds, held for approximately 90 seconds, and then released over 6 seconds. 4.1 kilonewtons is roughly 418 kilograms of force. Imagine a large adult male hanging their full body weight on the rope. That's maybe 1 kilonewton. This was 4 times that. Applied gradually, held steadily, released smoothly. There was nothing mechanical or percussive about it. It didn't read like a rockfall impact. It read like something pulling, deliberately, with control. The second event was November 4th at 0308. Same profile, same magnitude, 92-second hold. The third, November 6th, 0311, 4.3 kilonewtons, 87-second hold. Do you see the pattern? Every other day, always between 0308 and 0313, always in the deep early morning, always a smooth pull, a long hold, a smooth release. The 4th, 5th, and 6th events continued the pattern through November 12th. The magnitudes increased slightly each time, 4.1, 4.1, 4.3, 4.5, 4.7, 4.9. A half-step escalation, like something testing the system, learning what the rope could bear. Marcus didn't say anything for a long time after we looked at the data. Then he said, "We need to go down there." And I said, "Yeah." And then neither of us moved toward the cave. We went in. We descended the first pitch. We checked the rope. No visible damage, but when I ran my hand along the sheath near the bottom anchor, I could feel heat. Not warmth. Heat. Not enough to burn, but enough to be wrong. Static rope does not generate heat sitting in a cave at 11 degrees Celsius. I knelt down and put my ear close to the line, the way you'd listen to a rail for a train, and I heard it, a low, continuous vibration, not a hum, more like the sound a phone makes on a wooden table when it's buzzing with a call you can't see. The rope was alive with it. We descended to the second pitch. We went to the top of the third, and there, in the beam of my helmet lamp, I saw something that made my throat close. My gear bag was sitting at the edge of the pitch. Not mine. A spare bag we'd left clipped to a bolt at the second pitch station on our previous visit, a standard PVC kit bag with carabiners and webbing inside. It was now at the top of the third pitch, 20 meters from where we'd left it, sitting upright on the ledge as if someone had carried it down and set it there carefully. And as I watched, one of the carabiners clipped to the outside of the bag rocked, gently, side to side, the way a kitchen chair rocks when someone has just stood up from it, that tiny residual motion that tells you a weight was here a moment ago and now isn't. There was no wind, no draft, no vibration I could feel through my boots. The carabiner rocked twice, and then was still. Marcus grabbed my arm, not to pull me back, to confirm I'd seen it. I had. I submitted an emergency escalation request that night. I flagged the ticket as Priority 1, Anomalous Activity in Confined Space. Under our protocol, a Priority 1 triggers an automatic call-out of the regional rescue team and a 48-hour site lockdown pending investigation. But the system flagged my request for administrative review because Harker Sync fell into the jurisdictional overlap, and the automated routing didn't know which agency's rescue team to notify. It went to a queue, an actual queue. I called the county emergency coordinator at home. She told me she couldn't authorize a cross-agency deployment without written approval from the forestry district supervisor, who was still on leave. She said she'd escalate it in the morning. I told her the morning might be too late. She asked, "Too late for what?" And I didn't have an answer that would fit in a sentence that a bureaucrat would take seriously at 11 o'clock at night. I went back alone on November 15th. I know that was wrong. Every protocol I've ever trained under says you don't go into a confined space alone, especially one flagged as hazardous, but I need you to understand. The data showed the events happening every other night. The last one was November 12th. The next one would be November 14th. I'd missed it because of the download trip and the escalation paperwork. The one after that would be November 16th. I had one night, one window. I wanted to put a camera on the third pitch, a simple trail cam with infrared and a motion trigger, 30 minutes in and out. That was the plan. I signed in at 22:14. I descended the first pitch. The rope felt normal, no heat, no vibration. The cave was quiet in the way that only caves can be quiet. The total padded silence of deep stone, broken only by the occasional drip and the sound of my own breathing echoing off surfaces I couldn't see. I reached the second pitch. I descended. I reached the third. The gear bag was gone, back on the bolt at the second pitch station where we'd originally left it. I confirmed this on my way down. It was clipped in exactly as I'd left it a month earlier, 20 meters uphill from where Marcus and I had found it 2 days ago. I want you to think about that. A 5-kilogram bag, clipped with a locking carabiner, moved 20 meters through a passage that includes a hands and knees crawl and a vertical climb. Moved, placed, and reclipped while no one was in the cave, while the gate was locked, while the sign-in sheet showed no entries. I set up the trail cam at the top of the third pitch, bolted to a wall bracket, aimed down into the dark. I turned it on. I checked the angle. And then I heard the rope. It started as a creak, the sound an anchor bolt makes when the load shifts, that metallic groan of steel torquing against stone. Then the singing started. You've probably never heard a rope under dynamic load in an enclosed space. It's not a twang. It's a sustained, rising note, like a cello string bowed slowly, and in a cave, the sound reflects and multiplies until you can't tell where it's coming from. It filled the passage. I could feel it in my sternum. I looked up toward the second pitch. My rope, my descent line, was taut. As I watched, it began to move, not swing, not bounce. It pulled, steadily, toward the dark below the third pitch, as though a hand at the bottom was drawing it down, inch by inch, with smooth, patient force. The anchor bolts above me groaned. Dust, white, calcium-bright dust, sifted down from the ceiling around the bolt hangers like snow. I grabbed the rope. I don't know why. Instinct. I grabbed it with both hands and I felt the pull. It was warm, almost hot, and it was strong. Not a jerk, not a yank, but a slow, inexorable tension, like the current of a deep river, like the rope was a tendon connected to something enormous that was simply contracting. My gloves slipped. The sheath was glazing under friction I could not see the source of. I let go. The pull stopped. The silence that followed was worse. In the beam of my lamp, I could see the rope hanging slack again, and I could see the fine white dust still settling in the air, and I could hear my own breathing, harsh and ragged, and under it. Another breath. Not an echo. I know what my own echo sounds like in a cave. I've heard it thousands of times, and this was not my echo. It was slower than mine, deeper, and it was coming from below the third pitch, from the dark that my lamp couldn't reach, from somewhere in the lower level where the passage narrowed to 60 centimeters, and the air smelled like metal. I ran my recorder. I always carry a pocket recorder for field notes. I had it running. When I played it back later, here is what was on it. I've transcribed it exactly as it sounded. Timestamp 22:47:13. My breathing rapid. The sound of my boot scraping on rock. Then, faintly, a rhythmic metallic noise. Tick, tick, tick. Like a carabiner tapping against a bolt hanger, evenly spaced, approximately 1 second intervals. This continues for 31 seconds. Then my voice, whispering, "That's not mine. That's not." None of my gears moving. 8 seconds of silence. Then a sound I can only describe as a long, slow exhale, distorted by passage acoustics into something that could be air moving through a restriction but had a quality, a wetness, a warmth in the frequency that air alone does not have. Then the ticking stops, then nothing. I ascended. I will not pretend it was calm or controlled. I press-hiked up that rope faster than I've ever climbed in my life, and the entire time I was waiting for the pull to start again, for the rope to go taut beneath me, for whatever was down there to simply take up the slack with me on it. It didn't. I reached the surface, locked the gate, drove to the highway, and sat in my truck under the sodium lights for 45 minutes before my hands were steady enough to drive home. The trail cam. I need to tell you about the trail cam. I went back with Marcus and 2 other techs the next morning, November 16th, to retrieve it. The cave was quiet. The rope was slack. We descended, all 4 of us, full rescue protocol, radio contact with surface every 10 minutes. The trail cam was where I'd put it. Still on, still recording, battery at 63%. We reviewed the footage in the parking lot. The camera had triggered twice during the night. The first trigger was at 03:09. There it was again, that window, that precise 5-minute slot in the dead of the early morning. The infrared image showed the rope. In the first frame, it was slack. Over the next 14 seconds of footage, it drew taut. There was nothing visible pulling it. No hand, no body, no animal. The rope simply tightened as if the darkness itself had taken hold of it, and then the camera triggered off because there was no further motion in the frame. The rope was taut and still. The second trigger was at 03:11. The rope released, 14 seconds of it relaxing back to a drape. Nothing else in the frame. Empty passage, bare stone, and the rope moving by itself, with 4.9 kilonewtons of force that came from nowhere and returned to nowhere. I submitted everything. Data logs, photos, audio, video, chain of custody documented. I requested an immediate full closure of Harker Sink and a formal investigation. The request went to the Interagency Committee. The Interagency Committee met on November 22nd, 6 days later, and concluded that the evidence was consistent with possible geological instability and recommended a geological survey before any further action. The geological survey was contracted to a firm that had a 4-week lead time. Christmas was coming. Schedules were thin. The survey was booked for January 9th. During this time, I checked the sign-in sheet 3 times. Each time I drove up, stayed in my truck, walked to the gate, checked the sheet, and left without entering. On December 3rd, the sheet was normal. On December 14th, the sheet was normal. On December 28th, there was a new entry. The handwriting was shaky, almost illegible. The name field read something like Mercer or Marcer. I could not be sure. The date was December 26th. Time in, 3:10. Time out was blank. Purpose of visit was blank. There was a smudge after the name that might have been more writing, or might have been water damage, or might have been a hand dragging across the page. The ink was strange, too dark, almost rust-colored, as though the pen had been contaminated with something. I photographed it. I reported it. The gate was still locked. The combination had not been shared with anyone named Mercer. No one in any of the 3 agencies recognized the name. I requested a welfare check. It took 2 days to process because nobody could determine whether a sign-in entry constituted a missing person report or a trespassing incident, and the 2 categories route to different departments. On December 30th, a ranger and I entered the cave together. The rope on the first pitch had been re-rigged. I need you to understand what that means. Someone, or something, had untied the figure 8 follow-through at the top anchor, re-threaded it through the bolt hanger with a clove hitch instead, added a second anchor point using a length of webbing that was not ours, and retensioned the line. The clove hitch was dressed perfectly. The webbing was threaded through a new bolt hanger that had been drilled into the wall at a point I had never placed a bolt. The drill hole was clean. The hanger was tightened. The webbing was tied with a water knot with appropriate tails. This was skilled work. This was the work of someone who knew rope rigging, and it had been done in a locked cave with no entry on the sign-in sheet except a name that matched no one. We did not go past the first pitch. The ranger wanted to. I refused to let him. I told him that we were looking at a scene that did not make sense, and that pushing deeper into a system that did not make sense was how people died. He argued. I pulled rank, which I technically did not have over a ranger, but which I exercised by unclipping his descender from the rope and telling him we were leaving. He filed a complaint about me later. I did not care. The geological survey happened on January 9th. The geologists found no instability, no shifting bedrock, no hydrological anomalies beyond the normal seasonal sump. They did note in their report that the air quality in the lower level was atypical, with elevated levels of carbon dioxide and trace gases they couldn't identify without more sophisticated equipment. They also noted that their survey tape, a 50-meter reel they'd lowered into the third pitch to measure depth, had come back up 11 meters shorter than when they'd lowered it. They assumed it had snagged and broken. They noted it as equipment loss and moved on. I didn't move on. I couldn't, because the night after the geological survey, January 10th at 03:12, My phone rang. Unknown number, I answered. There were 4 seconds of silence, then a sound that I recognized immediately, the singing of a rope under load, captured through what sounded like a radio microphone or a walkie-talkie keyed open. Then a voice. I think it was a voice. It might have been a frequency artifact, a harmonic of the rope vibration shaped by the cave acoustics into something that resembled speech, but it said, or seemed to say, a single word twice. Climbing, climbing. In caving, climbing is a call. When you're ascending a rope and you want the person at the top to know you're coming up, you shout, climbing, and they respond, climb on. It's safety communication. It means, I'm on the rope, I'm coming up. Be ready. No one responded. The call ended. I have not been back to Harker Sink. The Interagency Committee closed the cave to all entry in February after a second ranger reported hearing intermittent mechanical sounds from the sinkhole while on a routine trail patrol. The closure order is indefinite. The sign-in sheet was removed and placed in evidence storage by the county sheriff's office after I pointed out that the Mercer entry might constitute evidence of a missing person. As of the last time I checked, and I check, no one named Mercer, Marcer, or any phonetic variant has been reported missing in the state. The tension logger is still installed. I download the data remotely now via a cellular relay I mounted near the gate. The events continue every other night, always between 0308 and 0313. The force magnitudes have been increasing, the last reading I pulled. And I will not say exactly when, because I don't want anyone going up there. Was 6.2 kilonewtons. That's over 630 kilograms. The rated breaking strength of the rope is 32 kilonewtons. At the current rate of escalation, which has been linear and predictable, the rope will reach its breaking point in approximately 14 months. I don't know what happens when it breaks. I don't know if the breaking is the point, if whatever is at the other end wants the rope to fail, wants the anchor to pull, wants a reason for someone to go down there and re-rig it, to add more rope, to extend the line deeper, to create a path. I don't know if the sign-in sheet was a message or a lure. I don't know if the voice on the phone was meant for me specifically, or if the cave just dials numbers now, the way a tree falls, whether or not someone is there to hear it. I don't know what Mercer saw. I don't know where the gear bag goes when I'm not looking at it. I know that the rope is being pulled. I know that the pull is getting stronger. I know that it happens on a schedule, and that the schedule matches to the minute the window of deepest human sleep. When responders are slowest, when phone calls go to voicemail, when incident tickets sit in queues. I know that something in the lower level of Harker Sink is patient and methodical, and it understands rigging, and it is climbing. And I know that every system we have, every protocol, every chain of command, every form and signature and approval process that is supposed to protect people, is designed for things that make sense. The system works when the problem has a name. When the problem does not have a name, the system sends it to a queue, and the queue sends it to a meeting, and the meeting sends it to a survey, and the survey loses 11 meters of tape and calls it equipment loss. And meanwhile, every other night at 3 a.m, something pulls the rope and the bolts grind, and the dust falls, and the force climbs by exactly 0.2 kilonewtons, and no one who has the authority to act will act because the incident has not been classified. I still drive that stretch of Route 9 sometimes, late, alone, Sodium lights overhead, fog between the ridges, and the forest pressed tight against the guardrails. I slowed down when I passed the access road. I rolled down my window, and I listened. I haven't heard anything from the ridge, not yet, but the data says 6.2, and the math says 14 months, and the rope is still there, and the cave is still locked, and the bolts are still grinding, and I'm the only one reading the logs. And last week, I wasn't going to mention this, but I think I have to. Last week I opened the cellular relay dashboard and found a new data anomaly. The logger recorded an event outside the normal schedule. A single pull. Brief. 1.2 kilonewtons. It happened at 1447 on a Wednesday afternoon. I checked my own records. At 1447 on that Wednesday, I had been sitting at my desk reviewing the Harker sync file. I had opened the data dashboard at 1446. 1 minute later, the rope pulled, as though it knew I was looking, as though it wanted me to know it knew. I closed the dashboard. I haven't opened it since. The data is accumulating. The pulls are continuing. I am choosing right now, in this moment, not to look. But I can feel it, the way you can feel a phone buzzing in a room you've already left, the way you can feel someone reading over your shoulder. The rope is still there. It's still taut. And whatever is at the other end is still climbing. That's all I have. That's everything I know. I want to thank you for sitting with me through this. I know it's a lot, and I know some of it sounds impossible, and I honestly wish it were. If you're still listening, do me a kindness tonight. Leave a light on somewhere in your home, not for any superstitious reason, just because the dark is large and the light is small. And sometimes the best thing we can do for each other is to make sure the small things stay lit. Take care of yourselves. I'll be here if you need me.